This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
I'd just like to say that I do really love the title of this retreat, which Paramananda came up with. Awakening. In a way, the path is all about awakening, but I just like that juxtaposition of the Poetics of Awakening, that it's not just here's the teachings and you study, here's the practices that you have to work really hard at, and then this awakening process will happen. But it's like some words have a resonance, they have a symbolic meaning, they have loads and loads of multiple interpretations, and they just evoke stuff with us even if we haven't thought about it consciously. And for me, both poetics and awakening have that effect. One of the things Paramananda talked about was about liking Blake and the idea of double vision that Blake talks about, and everything having at least two ways of looking at it, maybe. And in particular, he was drawing out looking at things literally and looking at things poetically. And I think we so often look at things and then act our lives in a very literal way. It's really helpful, I think, to be reminded of that poetic dimension and this whole path, the awakening process. There's that whole poetic dimension to it. And I felt that all the ways he was talking in meditation were doing that. So there was some things that were very sort of practical, very basic. We did a lot about posture, but even when we were looking at posture or the gesture that we make with our bodies, it was also very much on a symbolic level and on a poetic level. The idea that to meditate is to express yourself, and then we express ourselves in a very fundamental way just by being who we are. And we do that when we take up our meditation posture, and we're just being ourselves, being aware of ourselves. That is part of how we express ourselves and how we begin to get a deeper experience of ourselves. If we're on a spiritual path, if we're following the Buddha, practicing the Dharma, there is that sense of wanting to change, wanting to grow, wanting to develop our potential, wanting to transform ourselves. And yet, there's that paradox that actually how we do that is by being who we are, moment by moment, being who we are more and more authentically, more and more in line with reality, our own reality, yeah. So when Paramananda was talking about posture, or making a gesture with the whole of our body, he talked of it not just the alignment, and he did talk very specifically about alignment when we're sitting and how important the posture is, that if we're misaligned then there's a whole lot of extra tension in our body, and if we align ourselves and have a posture that aligns with gravity, how helpful that is. Talk very much about shoulders aligned with hips, ears aligned with the shoulders, nose aligned with the navel, in a very physical, practical way. But he also talked about alignment with the world, alignment with reality, alignment with the way things are. Which for me, more and more, all my practice is about that, becoming more and more aware of all the conditioning, all the views, all the habits, all my patterns. And as I become more aware of them, maybe freeing myself from them or being able to not always react in that way. And some of that comes about when I can actually see things as they are. In Buddhism, insight and awareness is sometimes described as seeing things as they really are. And from that point of view, being aware of things like conditionality, dukkha, impermanence. So having that dharmic perspective on reality, on our experience, on everything that we see or do. But of course, we're not separate from the world, we're not separate from reality. Again, Paramananda talked quite a lot about that, about how we sometimes talk about the world and reality being outside of ourselves or other than ourselves, but really it's all one. You could say there's just the world, you could say there's just us, that the world is arising and we are arising as part of it. We're constantly arising in the world, and everything is co-arising in relationship with everything else. And talking about the world being just a different way of talking about reality. And in a way, as we are part of the world and co-arising, we are just a part of reality. We are just part of the world. So if we're trying to see things as they really are, yes, we can look at our external conditions and try and see them with a Dharmic perspective, see things as they really are. But actually, we can also do that in terms of our own experience, our very personal experience of our bodies, our hearts, our minds, and everything that's arising, passing away within us, moment by moment. If we can see it as it is, without pushing it away, without ignoring it, without trying to make up stories or hold on to things in different ways, just see what's there. In that way, we are still aligning ourselves with reality. So seeing what's happening in our body moment by moment, experiencing the breath moment by moment, the feelings, our reactions, our emotions, our thoughts, all of those things arising and passing away in ourselves are aspects of reality. So we can be practicing insight and awareness in a very practical, down-to-earth way by just sort of noticing, what is happening when we sit, what is happening in our bodies, what's happening with our energy, what's happening with our mood, our feelings, our thoughts. And it's not always easy to sit with what's going on. So again, we need to sort of practice openness, receptivity, bring kindness, compassion to ourselves, knowing that we're not always going to be able to do it, but that just keeping on doing it as a practice, we'll get better at it, we'll be able to do it more and more. And that is part of this whole process of awakening, whole process of transformation. What does it mean, awakening? What does it mean to transform? And what is our felt experience of that? So Paramananda also talked about waking up as moving towards something more authentic, becoming more oneself. And as we do that, coming more into the world, more into a harmony, relationship with the world, that posture again, the posture of alignment is in alignment with the world, taking our place in the world, being aware of our place in the world. We're not separate from the world. We are a manifestation of reality in the world. So just becoming more aware of our experience of a being in the world. What does it feel like, moment by moment? What does it feel like to be alive, Paramananda asked. What does it feel like to be in the world? And in particular, what does it feel like to be you in the world? So for me, my practice over the years, I do get interested sometimes in exploring a particular teaching or practice in more depth. And because all the teachings are basically the same teaching, just come out from different ways and you always get to the similar place. It does. Sometimes I want a little bit of variety, but more and more I'm just wanting to go into simplicity. And I've got all these books, shelves of books on Buddhism and meditation, most of which I never look at, some of which I've never even opened. And there's a few that I come back to again and again, but quite often I just don't look at any of those. I just do my meditation and see what's happening. And then later I come and read a book and think, oh yeah, that makes sense because of because of my own experience. Whereas I think at the beginning I would read loads and loads just to try and understand and have this sort of theoretical understanding of meditation, or not really understanding because it didn't quite make sense to me when I tried to read it like that. I remember probably some of you have come across Kamal Sheila's book, which I think is a great book, overview of meditation practices and ways of working with it. But when I was first reading that, it was just like I just couldn't get through it. And it didn't make sense because it wasn't tapping into or aligning with my own experience. Yeah. Later, after I'd been meditating for years and I, went back to it, I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense, because I had an experience and I understood what he was getting at. And sometimes it was helpful because it gave me a little bit more clarity and structure and understanding some of the traditional approaches and teachings and where everything fitted in with each other. So everybody has their own way of approaching practice, but I suppose for me more and more it's just trying to be embodied, trying to be authentic, trying to be real, trying to be more aware and trying to be kinder, really. I think those are the two things, the two main strands in meditation are about trying to develop kindness and compassion and trying to develop awareness and insight, I would say. And we have the two motivations, the two categories that meditations often put into this: samatha practice and vipassana practice. Samatha around trying to, establish ourselves in sort of more calmer, spacious, less distracted states, positive mental states, and the vipassana more about developing insight awareness, leading to awakening and enlightenment. But I don't think they are separate. I think right from the very first time you meditate, they're both there together, even if you're not conscious of it. And it does take a long time. I think sometimes we have that experience, beginner's mind, when we're starting out meditating and we get into some quite absorbed, spacious, very enjoyable states of mind. We get a glimpse of what's possible in meditation and what actually, if we continue practicing, may be possible also in our everyday lives. But probably most of us start meditating because we're feeling stressed out or in crisis, or someone suggested it would be a good thing for us to do, and it's more looked at as a tool to help us cope with our lives, manage our lives better, or a tool of growth and transformation. And it can be all of those things, but it's so much more than just a tool, and it's reducing meditation if we view it in that way. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong but with using meditation to help in our lives or help in our relationships and to develop sort of qualities or concentration or work with, emotional issues and things like that. It can be very effective in that, and certainly for me it has been very effective and very healing. But then it's keeping it on a quite surface level. I mean, you may get into quite emotional depths, but it's not taking you into those other levels of being reality, a bit more mysterious, the unknown, the unseen, the connection with all the, I suppose, different levels of reality, including more poetic, more imaginative reality. For me, devotional practice is very much a way of connecting with a whole different level of reality. But whatever we do in meditation and wherever we're starting, there is that potential, that opportunity to come into a deeper, more honest, more authentic relationship with ourselves. Paramahansa talked about meditation as being very intimate, an intimate act, where we encounter ourselves in a different way. We get an opportunity to see ourselves, experience ourselves more deeply, And then as a result of that, maybe we look at the world and ourselves afresh and in a different way, and that being part of this awakening process. And it takes courage to do that. We don't always want to encounter all the bits of ourselves, let alone sit with them, let alone explore them and own them and integrate them. But paradoxically, that is all part of this journey towards calming ourselves. Yeah. And even if you've been meditating for many years, because our mental states, our physical states, our energetic states, everything is all connected with everything that we're experiencing, what's happening in the world, what's happening in our lives. However long you've been meditating, there will be times when there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of stuff going on in your meditation practice. But can we create that capacity to sit with it, to be more spacious, and also not to get reactive with it? There's something about meditation when we sit, just basically we're sitting still, and yes, there's all the different subtle movements that might be going on, sensations in the body, the movements as we breathe, as we adjust our posture. But in a way, we're stopping. We're not running around doing activities, we're just stopping in a very physical way and being still. And that in itself has a power, is effective. Even though there may be still a lot going on in our minds, in our hearts, a lot of emotions, lots of thoughts. It can be that if we just keep on, that continuity of practice, of creating those times of being still, times of being open and receptive, that gradually we'll experience the calming of the body, calming of energy, calming of our minds. A bit like when you've stirred up the mud in a river, and then after a while, and it might take quite a long time, but it will gradually settle, and then the water will become clear again. If we create the conditions over time, then we can create that sort of stillness, that clarity, that sort of spaciousness in our minds. And I think space is really important. Paramanda talked about meditation as creating space. And often we need to create the time and space in our lives in order to meditate. But I think also creating time and space in our lives in addition to meditation is really helpful. Because without time, and especially time when we're alone and we're not caught up in activities or interacting with other people, there's this sort of potential space where we can be more with ourselves, and then there's space for stuff to emerge. Space for us to sort of have insights, to be more creative. I know for myself, I have this constant battle with trying to be more spacious and getting caught up in stuff, and particularly as chair of the Buddhist Centre and with a very small team and so much going on all the time, that even to do the practical tasks, sometimes it's hard because there's always interruptions, there's always messages, emails, people, there's always tasks and deadlines, and let alone all the practical things in life like shopping and making sure that you've done everything you need to do on a sort of personal admin level. But without that space, we kind of get stuck in the same place. What sometimes called Western busyness, when you're so busy doing things that you don't allow yourself to have time to explore and do the things which are most meaningful in your life, most of value in your life, or even to become aware of what those might be. And I know, like, from a sort of creativity point of view, very much need space in your life, space in your mind for things to emerge, take form, to get inspiration, even before you might start on any kind of practical crafting of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a poem, a painting, creating a garden or something, cooking. You do need the space to get in touch with something a bit deeper. And when we sit, even if it's just for a short while, we are creating that space. And if we sit regularly, there's a continuity, that space. And especially if we go on retreats, then maybe we're creating a bit more time and space than normal in our lives. That can be so valuable. So what is it that we're trying to do when we meditate? And I thought I was really struck by Paramananda asking it, saying, what do we desire when we meditate? Because it is really helpful to have some aware of maybe intentions, directions. I think goals can be a little difficult because then we get very task oriented and wanting to achieve something in our meditation, and then being unhappy when we don't, or if our mental state is not how we want it to be. If we're distracted and we want to be calm, if we're feeling really annoyed or envious or something when we want to be experiencing metta, So again, part of that aligning ourselves with reality is actually being with whatever is there, even if it's not what we want to be there or think should be there, what other people have told us should be there, to just actually be with what is. And allow ourselves to have that deeper experience of ourselves, sitting with ourselves, expressing ourselves as we meditate. And it's a long-term project, Sometimes it can take quite a while before we can get to that place of stillness and calm and spaciousness in our meditation, or when we can get to it more regularly rather than it just happening every now and again, and us not, in a way, not feeling that it's anything that we've worked towards. But actually every time you sit, however distracted you are creating conditions, and the fruits of your practice may take quite a long time to manifest. Or maybe they won't, but sometimes you might immediately feel benefits, or other people might even tell you that they see that you've changed and, be quite positive about it. But there's some stuff that we might not be aware of or might not happen for years. Sometimes when you have those really deep insight experiences that change everything, or we have an experience that we haven't had before, it's not random, it's not coming completely out of the blue, it is arising because of all the other things that we have experienced, that co-arising with the world, with reality. We've been planting the seeds, we've been nurturing the seeds, watering the plants, the shoots, allowing things to blossom in their own time. But you can't force the growth of a seed. It will grow at its own pace. That's one thing that It needs the right conditions, and it will grow depending upon what kind of seed it is at different speeds in different ways. With little kids, when you're trying to do growing things, you try and find things that will grow really quickly because they have no patience. So maybe mustard seeds and cress. Beans, they might take about a week, and that feels like interminable for little kids. They come back every 5 minutes wanting to see if it's grown. And we can be a little bit like that in our practice. So it's good to just sort of relax and trust that stuff will happen without us really trying to force it. Yeah, just being ourselves, being in the world, bringing awareness, not just to what happens in meditation, but how we are in our everyday lives. And of course the two are not separate because it's the same body, the same mind, the same heart. It's just that when we're still and we don't have the distractions, we can be with it more deeply without all the distractions, without getting into our habits, without having our button pushed and going into all sorts of stuff that's not helpful. We just have that space, to see, to be. And maybe, getting into a little bit of that bigger mind. The Buddha talked about contracted mind and expanded mind. Sometimes people talk about small mind, big mind. And as Paramanda said, we all know what it's like to be in that little mind, what it feels like. We're caught up with all our concerns. There's a sort of tightness and narrowness. We feel much more limited, maybe less aware of others and the world, and we're just so caught up in our own experience, our own worries, our own life. And it's very much based on me and mine, that ego consciousness sort of in a way dominating our experience. And I'm sure we've all had moments, maybe extended moments, when we're feeling more open, more receptive, more spacious, feeling the interconnections with us and other people, other living beings, the natural world. In a way, experiencing ourselves as part of the world, part of reality, and not with that separation. And in a way, that's what we're trying to move towards, create the conditions where that will arise more and more and become more part of our natural way of being. And of course it is our natural way of being. It's just all these things that we've experienced have created all these other patterns, all these other conditions that we may need to sort of clear and obscure everything that's obscuring what's there. But we all have these qualities, we all have Buddha natures, so to speak. But it doesn't mean to say that because we've all got Buddha nature, we're all the Buddha. We do actually need to practice in order to, in a way, let that manifest more. Padmasambhava says that just as in the case with the sesame seed being the cause of the oil and milk being the cause of butter, but where the oil is not obtained without pressing and the butter is not obtained without churning, so all sentient beings, even though they possess the actual essence of Buddhahood, will not realize Buddhahood without engaging in practice. So part of the conditions of awakening are engaging in practice, however that may look and be for each of us, which may be very different. There's not a right or wrong way of doing it. We've got all these lists of Buddhist teachings and ways of approaching. We get people writing books, giving talks about how to meditate. I suppose in this retreat we're sort of trying to create a particular approach or way of thinking, being in our meditation, or at least questioning it. But in a way, everyone has to find their own path. Everyone has to have ownership over their own practice, their own meditation, their own mind, their own spiritual journey. But it's good to be with others and explore that in a way. We don't have the answers. We're just trying just as much as you're trying. We maybe would be meditating a bit longer than some people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that anything we say is more valid. But there's something about sort of sharing experience, and certainly for me, when I came along to West London for the first time and experienced classes with Paramananda, it really changed my meditation, because it got me much more in my body, my imagination. I became much more creative and just less in my head, less in a sort of striving mode, much more allowing myself to be and see what was going on, experience what was going on. We say, you turn towards your experience, you're trying not to judge. But sometimes that's just words, isn't it? How do we actually create the conditions where we can just be? And there's something about how Paramananda is kind of embodying that himself that, for me, kind of modelled it, gave me permission to do it. And I'm still practicing it. Sometimes I manage it, sometimes I don't. But much more I do find myself in those, calm, quiet, spacious places. And even if there's a lot going on and I'm feeling really thrown and upset and getting into all my old family patterns, when I sit down to meditate, I can still get into those places, or maybe I can hold it all as just part of reality. The two are not separate. We can have the calm and we can have the chaos. We can be skillful and unskillful. And our bodies, in a way, contain everything. We experience everything through our bodies. Everything's arising, passing away in our bodies. And our bodies are part of the world, in relationship with the world, in relationship with reality. I suppose mainly I'm just trying to encourage you to realise that whatever we're doing on however mundane a level it may seem, however personal level it may seem, that's still us practicing, that's still us aligning ourselves with reality. And that our meditation practice can be very simple, very open, very receptive. We don't always have to do things, try to change things, try to work in meditation. But there's that paradox with sometimes doing less is doing more. And we're not going to sort of make progress without kind of letting go of wanting to make progress. Yeah. So I would encourage everyone on this retreat to let go of the idea of making any progress whatsoever, whether that's emotional or whether that's spiritual, and just be with whatever arises.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.